What's up everybody, Alan here, 9 Lives FPV, and today we're going to do a quick unboxing, a little bit of a review, and I'll show you how to do some setup and changes on the new TBS VivaFPV Whoop. Now, a lot of people got these online the other day for Black Friday or Cyber Monday or whatever day you want to call it, because they were on sale. They're super cheap, and everybody's really anxious to get theirs, and I happened to get mine in the mail the other day, and I'll say in the long run it's a really nice Whoop. I will say that it runs really nice, it flies very nice. With that said, out the box it's been a little bit of a nightmare, but not all is lost, and everything's fixable. It's definitely easy to get everything back up and running, but out of the box it's pretty much unflyable. But we'll get into that here in a little bit. For now, let's go ahead and get into opening up, see what's in the box, and then we'll kind of go from there. Okay. All right, so let's take a look, see what we've got in the box. Comes in a clear box just like this, and got a little label on top. I'm sure you can take that off with some Goo Gone pretty easily. Open it up. We've got a couple of cards in here. First one is a Velocidrone card. Looks like a little advertisement and a 5% discount. Anybody who wants that, let me know and I'll be happy to give it to you. Looks like it's a scratch off code, so it's a one-time code. So let me know if you want it in the comments, and I will give it to the first person who says they want it. All right. Next, we got a little drone drop card, a little advertisement for drone drop. I'm subscribed to them. Pretty good value box. Next, we've got our USB 1S battery charger. And then we have the actual Whoop itself. The only difference between what I got and what you will get is that my props are already on the Whoop, and yours will come in a bag. The only reason mine are not in a bag is because I've already been messing with this all day and getting it up and working and flying, and now I'm making the video afterwards. So basically, let me just move this out the way. Basically, it's a nice little Whoop, your standard Whoop. I believe this is a 65 millimeter RKH 1S frame. It's got carbon fiber. It's got the I forget what they're called, but anyway, your mounts for your motors and everything. And it's got a 3D printed battery holder. You can get another different battery holder if you want to do 2S, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. If it's the one that I believe I saw online, I'll leave that down there. Let's go ahead and pop the hood, take a look at what's inside. Alright, inside we've got our camera. This is the TBS Micro Racing, or sorry, TBS Tiny camera. The props are the TBS Micro Racing props. And then our VTX is going to be right here. Let me get something to point with. Here we go. So our VTX is down here. This is going to be your TBS Unified Pro Nano 5G8. Really nice, really small. This one I believe does 25 milliwatts, and you can unlock up to 50, I do believe. I'll double check that and make sure. I'll put some descriptions down, or some information down in the description below. And then underneath all of that, we gotta peel this up a little bit nice and carefully. Alright, underneath all that we have our flight controller, and I do not at this time have very much information about this flight controller. Unfortunately, when these sold out, they deleted the listing, so I don't really have a whole lot of information on it. I do know that it'll handle 1S or 2S, and it's a pretty nice compact flight controller. If I can find any information online between now and the time that I post this, I will put a message in the description as to what it is exactly. But other than that, the It uses a 401 ESC down here in the bottom, and then those connect out to the motors, of course. Now, the board itself, the flight controller, you've got two buttons here, and these are actually going to come into play. The first one right here, let's see, I'm not sure if you can see that or not, but this top one is going to be your boot button. This is what you'd use to get into DFU mode. And then this one down here is going to be your bind button. And this is what you'll use to bind to your radio. And so you'll definitely need both of those. All right. Let's go ahead and put this all back together for now. It's a nice little package. Oh, you know, one thing I was going to talk about. This, since I have it open, the TBS Unify Pro Nano here, it doesn't really have any buttons or anything on it. It doesn't come with a button, but there's these two little pads. Let me see, right here and here. There's two pads here, and that's what you actually use to change the change which channel you're on and which band you're on. You can use, a lot of people say that they'll use just like a little piece of wire to jump it. That's what I have, and that's what I've used to jump it. And basically, there's directions online of what, you know, how long and what to press and so forth, so on. But I just use a little piece of wire and jump those two pads as needed to get that to change. Alternatively, you can use something, you know, like this, and basically you just pop that in there, and then you can solder a button onto another end, so that way you can use that and actually have a little button that you can use to press. Or if you have a Unify Pro Nano, you can, it actually comes with this button here. I'm not sure if you guys can see that. Let me, there we go. Comes with this button here, which is very nice. Nice little button here. And basically you just solder that in place there, or you can solder it to some leads and solder it on there. Nice little light button. But they did not include that in with this build. I assume to just save on cost. Every little bit counts. And it was pretty cheap compared to what you would normally pay if you were to buy all these components, put it together yourself. So that's their VTX. That's how you would change your channels and bands and things of that nature. Supposedly it's wired up for smart audio. I don't, admittedly, I don't know anything about smart audio, so I won't be getting into that. My buddy Randy Harbin, he's gonna look into that and see what he can find out when he gets his in the mail. And if he comes up with anything, I'll be sure to link that down in the description below. All right, so let's go ahead and put this thing back together, and then we'll kind of get into the whole process of configuring it, and what I found and what needs to be done to get this thing flying today. So, all right, there we go. All right, so the next thing I wanted to go through was, you know, a few things. We got some bad news, we got some good news, and then I'm going to kind of go through the whole setup process. So the bad news is this Whoop was originally shipped with a firmware that's set to use a proprietary configuration tool called Agent X, which is supposed to be being released by TBS. Unfortunately, I have not been able to find any sort of a release date on this, and it's not yet released. So there's no clear idea of when this tool's coming out. Only thing I can find was that it is coming out, quote, very soon. So by the time some of you guys see this, that tool may be readily available for you guys, and you'll be able to use that, and you won't have to worry about any of this. That's really one of the bigger things that's been an issue. We've got a few people that have reported that they're having some issues with bad soldering on this board. I read somewhere that somebody had some pins that were touching, which were basically bridging a couple of the motors together. So like motor 1 and 2 were working together. Basically, they were bridged, so they couldn't spin independently, so that was causing a lot of problems for them. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that most people are having issues with soldering on here, as far as from what I've read so far, is there's some issues with soldering. So if you're having any issues with soldering and desyncs and things like that, or anything weird going on, just check all your solder joints, and I may want to just go ahead and take everything apart and resolder it back together. That's what I would do personally. But other than the soldering issues, the main big issue that's keeping people from getting this thing flying is that the board is set up to use their own proprietary software, which isn't really released yet. The good news is that after a good bit of digging on Facebook and some groups and things like that, and messing around with this, I was able to gather all the information that is needed to get this thing to fly. So out the box, when you connect it up to beta flight, it's going to show up, or you're not even going to be able to see it. When you look at your device manager in Windows, you'll be able to see that you have a TBS flight controller, and that's it. So it's already got a Windows driver set up for it, and this is because of the software that's installed on there, the firmware that's installed on here. It's just set up to run that way. The good news is we can replace that by going into beta flight. So I'm going to kind of walk you through that whole process. I've already done this on mine, so I'm not actually going to do the work, but I'll show you, everything and then all the steps in there. All right, and so to get this thing up and running, there's going to be a few things that you're going to need. The first thing that you need to get set up is make sure that you have beta flight. Make sure you have the latest version downloaded, and then go ahead, and if you haven't already downloaded them, go ahead and get the latest of these two drivers here. There's plenty of videos online. I can link one in the description below if you guys need directions on where to get these, or how to get these, and how to install them and everything. So you're going to want to go ahead and get those downloaded and installed. And then for me, I had to use Zadig to convert the driver for when it was in DFU mode, so that I was able to see it to connect to the WinUSB driver. So we're going to go ahead and kind of walk through this whole process here to get it into DFU mode and show you how to flash it and so forth, so on. All right, so I'll show you the picture of the flight controller here. So this is the flight controller. It does look like it's going to be a give me a second, I got my note here. It looks like it's a tiny fish flight controller. That's going to be the firmware that we're going to use to flash to it, so that we can get it back to connect to beta flight and everything. But it looks very similar to the tiny fish flight controller right here that is used on the FrSky race whoop. So it's made by Tiny Fish. They're very similar, a little different for sure, but about the same size, and they do use the same firmware. So the big thing that you want to pay attention to here is that you got these two buttons here. This one is your boot button, and this one's your bind button. Your boot button is going to be the one that you're going to use to get it into DFU mode. And to do that, basically you're going to press and hold that button while you plug it into USB, and then that's going to put it into DFU mode. At that point, you may need to go into Zadig and replace that driver. And I will also link a video that shows how to do that in the description as well. I believe Joshua Bartwell has a pretty good video that shows how to do that, so I'll put that in the description. All right, so let's go ahead and pull this up here. So we got beta flight here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and plug in, and while holding that button that I showed you, And when you plug that in, you notice that up here in the top corner, this changed into DFU mode, into DFU. So that means that it's set up and it does see that there's a DFU or a board in DFU mode. So we can go in there and we can connect to that and flash that firmware. So to flash our firmware, we're going to basically just come down to the firmware flasher and choose our board. Board we're going to choose is Tiny Fish. And then we're going to choose a firmware. Now I chose 3.5.3 just because it's the latest and it's stable. And then I didn't change anything here except for the full chip erase. I did see someone else that used it or that turned on the no reboot sequence, but I didn't have to do that. So once I check that, then basically you're going to go to load firmware online and it's going to load, and then basically you'll hit flash firmware. And then it will go through and it'll cycle through and it'll show that it's erasing. Then it'll go through again and say that it's flashed the firmware. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to lose all my settings. But that's exactly what you do. If you run into any issues, you want to check everything. Make sure you selected the correct board type and firmware and everything. And you know, there's some general troubleshooting that can be done with that, and there's again plenty of videos that talk about what to do when you can't get that to go through, and I will have those linked in the description as well. Alright, so once you get that flashed, it'll reboot and everything, and then basically you should at that point, if you've already installed all your drivers, you should pop up and it changed from DFU mode to whichever COM port you're on. So mine I do believe is on COM port 5, and at that point you should be able to just come in here and connect to it. Now mine, I noticed, takes a little while to connect. That could be my computer, or it could be the board, just a limitation of the memory on the board or something. So basically what you're going to do is you can go through and you know, do a manual setup of everything and configure everything, but that's going to take you a little bit of time. I found a CLI dump online that we can use, and that I found works really well, and I will post that. Give me just a second here. Let me see if I have it. I believe I have it up. Yes, I do. Okay, so this was found on the TBS Facebook group, and basically it's the Betaflight Tiny Fish CLI dump. I will put this into the or a link to where you can find this in the description below. But essentially what you're going to do is you're going to go in there and you're going to open that file up. You're going to copy everything that's in there, and you're basically going to paste it down here and then hit enter. When you paste it in there, it's going to well, let's just paste it. So when you paste it in there, it pastes it in there, the whole thing, and it just sits there. You're not going to see anything happening up here. When you hit enter, it will go through and it'll apply all those changes to the flight controller at that time, and it'll put all that in there. So that'll save you a ton of time of getting this thing configured and set up from scratch. And then I always like to go in here and hit save, and basically what that'll do is that saves everything and then reboots the board as well. So once you hit enter on that, that'll do that, and it'll disconnect and refresh, and then I always make sure it completely disconnects, and then I reconnect. Once you have that CLI dump put in there, then this is where things get a little easier, and whoops, I think I hit it twice. This is where things get a little easier and more of what you're used to. In Betaflight, it's pretty much standard at this point. You're going to come in here, you're going to check your ports and everything. Mine was already set up based off that CLI dump. Everything's just set up working fine. But you want to check these just to make sure that everything's set up. FrSky stuff is set up on UART2, and you want to just make sure that's all set up correctly. You come in over here to your configuration, and DShot 600 should be set up, and then you'll want to check everything. If you're running reverse props, you'll reverse them here. I do believe mine was set up with motor stop on. I turned it off because I like mine to go. when I arm it. I'm trying to think what other things were on here. You want to make sure, of course, your receiver's set up. Check all your features and everything. This had air mode on whenever I reboot, so I turned it off because I don't fly. I won't be flying this in air mode. Trying to think what else there was. And then, oh yeah, down here, the beeper configuration. Every one of these is checked. You'll want to go through and check and uncheck whichever ones you want. I haven't gone through all mine and set it all up, but this is all in here, so you want to check that out. And then, yeah, none of those were on. And then, oh yeah, your arming. This will allow you to arm at 180. Which if you want to be able to use like a turtle mode on here, which I do believe you can, you'll want to make sure that that is set up and to where you can go, rearm at any angle. And I do believe that was everything that's in here. I'll post all the little changes and everything that was in the CLI dump in here so that you can know what to look for and just to verify everything. I'll post a link to that in the description below as well. Then, of course, you want to come over to your battery and power settings. I had to change this. This was set to 103. I was told it's supposed to be 113, so I changed that. And then all your voltages and everything, and where you want your warning cell voltage. 3.5 is where I like it. Some people like it at 3.3. I prefer not. I like it to start warning me at 3.5. And then I've even heard some people put it at 3.2, and I just think they're crazy. You're on your own when it comes to PID tuning. I will say that the stock PIDs that are in here, they're pretty good. They're flyable. I haven't had any issues with them. I haven't taken the time to go through here and change any PIDs or anything in here, filter settings, which I don't believe you can do filter settings, but I haven't changed anything in the PID tuning here. And then under receiver, you want to come in here, and of course you want to check to make sure everything's set up correctly. Let me go ahead and turn my receiver on real quick. Perfect. And so we have everything here. You want to make sure that your aux works. All your auxes that you're going to be using, you want to make sure those work. And then, of course, you have to make sure that you set up your receiver correctly. Again, there's a ton of videos that show how to do that. I can link Blue Falcon's video in here if you guys want. I'll put in the comment description, or the video description as well. But basically, you just want to make sure everything is there and set up and doing what it's supposed to do. Basically, you just want to make sure it turns when it's supposed to, and isn't doing what it's not supposed to. Right now, I've got a little bit of a drift in here, but I'll fix that later. It's not something I'm really worried about right now. I'm just trying to get this video out to you guys. And then you'll want to come into and check your modes and make sure those are all set up and get those set up. Now this one I did have to make a few changes just because it's based off of preference. But basically I believe ARM was set like in the middle somewhere on aux 2. So I changed that to aux 1 because that's where I prefer it to be. And then angle and horizon mode, you have angle by default, and then horizon you can set in the later half of the switch. And then we have beeper, which I have set up to where it comes on in the middle and the final location. And then the final location of aux 3 is my flip over after crash mode, which is turtle mode or whatever. So that's what I've got set up on mine. You can feel free to add whatever else you want in here and make whatever changes you want to that, of course. And then in motors, this is one area where you're going to want to double check everything. And this is what I was talking about when you are when you're working on. I'm going to turn my receiver off, or my radio off. Give me just one moment. Okay, this is what I was talking about. Whenever you want to check your motors, make sure you don't have any bridge pins or anything crazy like that. You want to check this and just make sure that everything moves the way it's supposed to. And this works pretty much just like any other quad, of course. So you basically just come in here and you want to hook up your battery and say I understand, and I always do master to make sure they all spin up, and then I'll just go through and do number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. Everything seems to be spinning just fine, so there's no issues with that. I'm not really going to get too much into direction on this at this point, just because we need to still go into BL Heli Suite and make some changes over there. But just to confirm, everything is working over here. Now, if you come in here and you find that things aren't working, or you have 2 motors spin up whenever you're only moving 1, then that's going to be looking where you want to look at some solder, see if you have any soldering issues. And then alternatively, don't dive too deep on that, looking into solder right away. Make sure you go through BL Heli first, just to make sure that it's not something that's just like a configuration issue. Always check your configuration issues just to make sure that there's nothing configured wrong, and then you can go in and check the manual stuff. And then that's pretty much it. Outside of the motors, that's pretty much all I set up in BL Heli, in Betaflight. And then from here, you basically want to disconnect so that you can have the COM port free and open. Okay, so the next thing that you're going to want to do is go ahead and open up BL Heli Suite. So I've got it pulled up here, and of course for this you're going to need a battery so that you can read everything and make some changes as needed. Alright, and I will have all the changes for everything listed in the comment section and below, so that way you guys don't have to listen in every little thing that I say. You can just pull them up on there. But basically you're going to want to come in here, you're going to want to go ahead and connect to it once your battery's plugged in, read your setup, hit OK, and now I actually have to do this. I've been flying without making these changes, and I haven't really had any issues. But these are changes that are recommended, so I'm going to go ahead and do them. First thing first is you want to set your startup power to 1, and of course we're doing this to all 4 ESCs. The next thing is you want your DMAG to be put on high, and then your motor timing should be medium. Okay. And then the main thing here is that you want your min and max to be set, your min at 1050 and your max at 2000. So I got this at 1064 and this one at 2004, which is that's just fine, no big deal. So we're going to go ahead and write our setup to all 4 of our ESCs, and everything went through just fine. Okay. Alternatively, you can come in here to motors and so check the box that you understand, and go ahead and hit calibrate ESCs. And then you can change these calibrations to your minimum and maximum as well here. Once you calibrate that, then of course you'll check it with your master. And then if everything is working correctly, then you're done with BL Heli. And after this, basically all we have to do is bind it. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out because we don't need that anymore. And I'm going to disconnect the Whoop from my computer. All right. Next, we're going to come back to this picture here. Actually, I think I got a better picture. There we go. So we have our two buttons here. Again, the boot one right here, and then the other one is our bind button. That's going to be the one that we're going to do now. And basically, all you got to do is press and hold that in while you plug in your battery, and it'll put it into bind mode. Now, when it's not in bind mode, you'll notice that you have a red light flashing, and then you also will have a little blue light flashing. And mine's beeping like crazy because it can't see my my controller right now. When your radio is on, it'll be bright green. Whenever you put it into bind mode, basically you're going to press and hold that button, and let me make sure I got the right one, and then plug in your battery. And then what you'll have is that bright blue button, or that bright blue light will light up and stay lit up and flashing, and your red light will also be flashing. And basically from there, it's just your standard binding procedure. You set up your controller or your radio and bind to it. And then there's only a couple other settings, I do believe, on your controller or your radio. I apologize. I keep saying controller. You guys know what I'm saying. So on the radio, I went in and I will just tell you guys what I got here. So we got the model in there. Your mode is going to be D8. So it's 8 channel, channel range 1 through 8. And then I'm trying to make sure, I believe that's all that I really had to change in here outside of your normal stuff. Yeah, your normal stuff of setting up, you know, your auxiliaries, you know, aux 1, 2, and for me 3. And then setting those up on the mixer as well. So you have your inputs and your mixers. But outside of that, I mean, that's pretty much standard setup. There's nothing too crazy or tricky that needs to be done on the actual radio itself to get things up and going. And when everything is done and you've got everything bound and working, ideally at that point you should be able to plug it in and start flying, and actually have a pretty decent experience. Again, you'll have to mess around with your PIDs if that's your thing, or you can fly on the stock PIDs. They work just fine. And then, yeah, you should be good to go. Again, TBS is planning on releasing their tool, Agent X, here sometime in the near future, but I just do not have any sort of an ETA on that as of yet. And the last big thing was just making sure to remind you guys that if you are finding that you're having some sort of issues with your flight controller or with motor issues where they're desyncing or just not connecting correctly, just make sure you go through here and check all your solder and everything. Oh, and this is one other thing that I wanted to touch on. I'm glad I switched through these pictures. This is your Unify Pro Nano VTX that they have on this thing, and there is a few things that you can do as far as switching channels. I'll put a link in the description below as to how to change these channels and how long you have to bridge those gaps and everything, or those two pads there, to be able to make those changes and everything. My buddy Randy Harbin, he's gonna see if he can get the smart audio working on this thing, and once he gets that sorted out, I'll make sure to post his video linked to this one as well. So hopefully he gets that sorted out pretty quick once he gets his, and then we'll be able to use smart audio to do this rather than jumping the pads. But for now, you know, you can jump the pads. Just I use a couple or a single piece of wire here folded in half, and you're just going to press it and or put it against those two pads and hold it for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, depending on what you're trying to change. You can change the channel or the band, and then the power as well on it. I believe it comes at 25 by default, and you can put it up to 50. I will say, and you'll see in the video, the flight video here in just a second, that this is probably the cleanest and clearest camera that I've ever seen when it comes to video, especially, or at least on a Whoop. It's really, really, really clear. So I don't know that, I mean, if you like to fly long distance with your Whoop, then I guess you could change it to 50, but I do not really see a need for the way that I fly to change it from 25 to 50. All right, let's see. Looks like we touched on everything. Okay, so that's the end of the video of how to set this up. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on Facebook, or you can message me here in the comment section below. I'll do my very best to try to answer your questions. If I know Randy, he'll be in the comment sections as well and try to answer any questions that he can. Randy's a great guy. I'm going to link his channel in my in the video description as well. He's a good guy. He's got a lot of knowledge when it comes to electrical components and drones in general. And I think you guys should check out his channel and see some of the stuff that he's doing. He's got some really cool videos out there. And And he's always he's a great guy. He's always more than willing to help out people. So, and I really appreciate him for that. So, if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. I'll do my very best to answer them. And with that, I leave you with this flight footage.